Hi everyone. Promised I'd kind of do a little YouTube video on how I got my 2000 Chevrolet S10 to run with an Ecotec 2.4. This is the LE5. This engine came from a 2006 Pontiac Solstice. It's got a 5-speed behind it, a Solstice 5-speed. And this 2000 S10 originally came with the 2.2 LN2 engine. Not a flex fuel, just a standard one. The main electrical challenges I came into with this setup is that you're sitting with two different ECM technologies, basically two generations of ECMs. You have the older, larger style ECM, which is what this truck came with, and then you have the smaller, newer ECM. I think it's called an E68. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. But basically, I had two challenges to face. One is I need to get the engine running. It needs to have its own management system. And also, I would like to have some gauges so I know if I'm overheating or I have no oil pressure or anything of that nature. So the primary focus is with the new ECM, which came from AFI Industries. That's who I contacted. It is a standalone system. It has everything you need to put an Ecotec engine into a rail buggy, basically. So it's not meant for official road use. It probably won't pass your local emissions standard testing if that becomes an issue. But it does have great performance. Runs really good. Idles great. It does work in stop and go traffic very well. I can attest to that. And it actually gets better gas mileage than the 2.2 that came out of this. So imagine that. I have noticed when I get on it, I do see a bit of soot coming out the tailpipe, which tells me probably there's a bit of a kind of a tune to this when you really rev on it, that it's meant to give it a lot of power. The advertisement for this told me there was about 190 horse for a semi-stock setup, whatever. I am running an intake and a header and a big exhaust, so maybe that ups it a bit. I don't know. I've never put this on a dyno. Probably never will. The AFI one, that setup, the engine, ECM comes with this fuse block. It's neat. It's got everything you need if you were going to put this into a rail buggy, which I'm not, which is why I actually just went ahead and retained the power center here, the stock one, stock relays, all that stuff. I'm using all of that. I had no reason to get rid of it. Actually, the fuel pump is stock too. Just an AC Delco one I threw in about 4 or 5 years ago when the original one died. So it's been doing great. It's the same liters per hour between the pump in this truck and a Pontiac Solstice. It's the same, 190, I think that's what it was. So there's no worry about that. If you're going in A, if you're going turbo or making bigger power, yeah, you might want to upgrade. I don't know. So basically with the overcoming the issue with the BCM, talking to the gauges, I retained the original ECM. So the original ECM is running oil pres, your purge solenoid. It's running that too. Engine coolant temp for the gauges, it's running that. It's running the fuel sensor, the fuel level sensor in the tank. All that, you know, there was no reason to interfere with any of that, and I just left the wiring that was there and got rid of the extra wiring I didn't need. No reason to play with it. The AFI Industries ECM comes with its own white tack wire. That white tack wire in of itself can actually run the gauge for you. You don't necessarily have to wire the white tack wire from the new ECM into the old ECM. It's not really a requirement, but I went ahead and did it anyway because it was less wiring overall. You don't need it for the purge solenoid. The purge solenoid, as soon as you turn the ECM on, the ECM is actually going to look at the pressure in the tank and make a decision of whether or not that valve needs to open once it's on and going. So it's not looking for engine speed indication or anything to kick that system into play. So the new AFI ECM, it does great. It's got its own ODVC onboard diagnostics, OBD2 connector. Sorry, I work in IT. And the OBD connector there, you can get data information from it. When you pull the information from this one, you read the codes from the AFI one, you're going to get a MAF sensor error. That if you try to reset it, it runs really crappy and then kicks it back on, because this has actually been converted to speed density, so there's no MAF sensor here. The only thing I had to do was put in a inlet air temperature sensor into the intake here, and then that was that. So that's all it really took to get this running. I did use a Dakota Digital signal converter for the VSS, because I am running this the AR5 Transmissions VSS, which actually kicks out a much slower signal than the NV1500 that came out of the truck. So that Dakota Digital modifier speeds it up enough to where I actually get proper speed indication. Use my phone and an app to get that narrowed down. I hope I'm right. As far as that goes, I'm also running the alternator for the Ecotec. It's doing great. It's turned on by the AFI ECM. No problem there at all. I might have been able to get away with using the original ECM, but I figured the one that does the running, I'd rather rely on that one than not, because at least I know it's going to do its job and there won't be any surprises down the line. You will not get your idiot light for low voltage, unfortunately. Maybe if you do it through the old ECM, you might get lucky. I don't know. I'm glad I have voltage indication, so I know if my alternator is doing its job. Other than that, the starter wiring is pretty much the same, because the starter's in the same location. Imagine that. The ground wire is a little bit, the power wire is a little bit different because of the way that the alternator was over here on the 2.2, but in the Ecotec it's over here. So the power wire that went to the alternator, you don't really need that anymore. You can cut that off and just have it wire from the Solstice alternator, the Ecotec alternator, to the starter here, and then come back around the engine and plug in and you're fine. So that's one wire eliminated. Fan, speaking on cooling, the Solstice comes with a 2-speed setup. It has a 180 and I believe a 210 degrees two wires coming out of the ECM that switch on the 2-speed fan for the Solstice. AFI did away with that, and they still have the 2 wires, but they both come on at 180. I guess to run maybe you might want a low profile dual fan setup, and that's what they have that to do, and they say I guess that works fine. My setup, from a long time ago, I am still running, this is a Volvo S40 2-speed fan and shroud with the Volvo relay, because it's a high capacity relay. And I actually am not using the AFI fan control wires. I'm using a BMW thermo switch. You can look this setup you can look up this setup online. It's used in a lot of applications. It's a pretty popular swap. It works super well. I can tell you that when this did have the 2.2 in it, the sitting in stop and go traffic, it was 108 degrees outside. I had the AC on, and the secondary fan it got to a point where the secondary fan had to kick on, and when it did, it actually overcooled the engine by about 10 degrees. So it works. In fact, this engine will not overpower the cooling system is very, very adequate for this engine. When I originally had this going, I had a problem with the thermostat. It was overcooling, and the faster it went on the highway, the lower the engine temp actually went. It almost went back down to about 140 degrees. So yes, this radiator is very, very capable of doing it. And I believe this is a single row radiator, which is what comes with the 4 cylinders. I heard maybe some of the V6s, the 4.3s have a dual core, I don't know. But this guy's working really well. Other than that, this is drive-by-wire. So I had to run the AFI ECM comes with a really long length of wire to plug into the pedal inside the cab. And you could probably go ahead and run the AFI ECM inside the cab if you wanted to. That might actually get your OBD2 connector closer to the one under the dash, so you can do some data reading while you're driving around. When I plugged this system up and ran it, the first time I hit the key, it fired right up. It has run spectacular. It's been running spectacular ever since I got it. It's been great. I have no complaints about it. It's a wonderful product. You have to shell out some cash, but all in all, I'd say it really saved me a lot of a headache. So that's pretty much it for this. Yeah, that's all the electrical that I had to do. Hope this helps somebody.